know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gail Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This is my revisionist history of the Santa Fe Ring's territorial boss, Thomas Benton Catron. The information is from my book, The Santa Fe Ring vs. Billy the Kid, The Making of an American Monster. Billy the Kid history needs the crimes of the Santa Fe Ring to make sense, and the Santa Fe Ring needs the crimes of boss Thomas Benton Catron to make sense. To uncover Catron's crimes, I ignored his so-called plausible deniability of personal guilt by using henchmen to commit his wrongs. I used criteria of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act about criminal conspirators. They make an instigator like Catron as guilty as his perpetrators. And Catron's guilt is obvious. All the crimes benefited him, not the committers. All the victims were his opponents. All the perpetrators were his lackeys. Laid bare is Catron's responsibility for the rigged elections, briberies, malicious prosecutions, terrorism, murders, and false outlawing of opponents that made 19th century New Mexico territory his fiefdom. He soaked its history in blood of anti-ring opponents from 1867 to 1892. He almost penetrated the 20th century with attempted murders. His escaped prosecutions prove only his corrupt power. His wicked henchmen were spared punishment and gained lifelong rewards. As will be seen, Catron's outrages in the Lincoln County War and in Billy the Kid history were not unique. They were his standard repertoire to destroy challengers. On screen is Thomas Benton Catron. He was a gluttonously bloated facsimile of robber baron cartoons by 19th century artist Thomas Nast. His psychopathic, brutal, vindictive, and megalomaniacal personality set his Santa Fe Ring style. His malignant cronyism infiltrated government, law enforcement, and business in his half-century of unpunished rampage. He became America's largest landowner and a New Mexico senator. A state county has his name. In 1866, with fellow lawyer Stephen Benton Elkins, Catron founded the Santa Fe Ring. On screen is Stephen Benton Elkins. Elkins was Catron's co-boss in Washington, D.C., shielding the ring on a federal level. Elkins was Catron's twin in physical appearance, greed, and conscienceless criminality. Catron's biographer is Victor Westphal in his 1973 book, Thomas Benton Catron and His Era. An apologist, Westphal parroted Catron's own cover-ups. As historically ignorant, he accidentally revealed damning truths. Thomas Benton Catron was born on October 6, 1840, At his ring's start, he was 26. He was the fourth of 9 children in a Lexington, Missouri farm family. Its original German surname was Kettenring. It wasn't the Hispanic Catron, as sometimes mispronounced in New Mexico. His Thomas Benton honored Missouri Senator Thomas Hart Benton. Senator Benton coined the racist and genocidal doctrine of manifest destiny. It rationalized Anglo's right to seize North America from Native Americans and Hispanics. In 1857, at Lexington's Masonic College, Catron met Stephen Benton Elkins, a year younger. In 1859, they were roommates in the University of Missouri. In the Civil War, Catron, then a Democrat, was a Confederate in the Missouri State Guard for 4 years. Elkins had brief Union service, then settled in New Mexico Territory. In 1864, Elkins was admitted to the law bar. He practiced in Doña Ana County's Mesilla. In 1865, when elected to the territorial legislature's House of Representatives, he moved to Santa Fe. In 1866, Elkins convinced Catron, studying law in Missouri, to join him. He accompanied Catron back as both schemed. Biographer Victor Westfall stated, quote, "Oral tradition indicates that on their journey, Catron and Elkins mutually resolved to seek a seat in the United States Senate and to create economic empires." Close quote. Elkins inspired Catron to learn Spanish like himself for intended land grab from Hispanic grant owners. On July 27, 1866, Catron arrived in Santa Fe. In 12 years, his and Elkins's ring would control the territory. Catron became a Republican to ally with William Breeden, well-connected founder of the territory's party. 5 months after Catron's arrival, Breeden got acting governor William F.M. Arney to appoint Catron district attorney for the 3rd Judicial District and to appoint Elkins as attorney general. The legislature protested Catron's appointment. It was ignored. Returned Governor Robert Byington Mitchell upheld Catron's appointment, and he promoted Elkins to U.S. Attorney. The circle of friends had begun. This was the Santa Fe ring. Catron, practicing law in Las Cruces, joined the bar in 1867. In late 1868, Catron was elected to the territorial House of Representatives. Ringite Governor Robert Byington Mitchell, on Elkins's recommendation, appointed Catron as Attorney General. Catron relocated to Santa Fe, becoming Elkins's law partner. As Attorney General, Catron was territorial prosecutor, and Elkins, as U.S. Attorney, was federal prosecutor. So by 1868, 2 years after Catron's arrival, the ring could do malicious prosecutions against opponents territorially and federally. In 1869, William Anderson Pyle became the next ringite governor. In 1870, on Elkins's recommendation, Pyle kept Catron as Attorney General. In Pyle's corrupt administration, he and Catron were accused of destroying territorial archives and conspiring to split offices with Democrats if the territory became a state. In 1870 came the ring's big boost. Elkins and Catron, acting as attorneys for Lucien Bonaparte Maxwell, cheated him out of his 2 million-acre Maxwell land grant. They resold it immediately for double the money to a syndicate of their friends. It became the Maxwell Land Grant and Railway Company. Additionally, They tricked Maxwell into founding the First National Bank of Santa Fe. Then they seized it by ruining him with their competing Second National Bank of Santa Fe. Money lending through the banks added to Catron's power, and Catron kept for himself the Maxwell Land Grant's Aztec gold mine, the richest in the world. Catron ultimately owned at least 34 land grants, as well as property in Mexico, California, Oregon, Colorado, Arizona, Kansas, and Missouri. Ultimately, he was the largest individual landowner in the history of the United States, with up to 6 million acres. Catron also had railroad interests. The Maxwell land grant's Raton Pass was used by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad for tracks from Colorado into New Mexico Territory. Catron was their attorney, as well as for the Southern Pacific, El Paso and Southwestern, and Denver and Rio Grande railroads. In 1871, President Grant appointed Marsh Giddings as governor. He joined the ring and escalated its tyranny. In March of 1872, President Grant promoted Catron to U.S. Attorney. He held the title until his forced resignation in 1878 to cover up his Lincoln County war crimes. That 1872 was the tipping point. Anti-ring rebellions began. What I named the legislature revolt occurred that year when legislators passed acts redistricting ring judges to stop their malicious prosecutions. Ringite Governor Marsh Giddings, using Catron as U.S. Attorney, suppressed them with troops, and Catron also bribed them, and he convened the Supreme Court to void that session's anti-ring acts. To end legislators' future power in rebelling, Grant, Doña Ana, and Lincoln counties, Catron and Giddings halved their representatives. In 1873, the Colfax County War began. Original Maxwell Land Grant settlers resisted the Catron and Elkins-controlled Maxwell Land Grant and Railway Company's eviction attempts to get their land. That year, Elkins was elected delegate to Congress, extending ring influence to Washington, D.C. Catron was accused of fixing Elkins's election by over 600 malicious prosecutions to force voters to back Elkins in exchange for Catron's dropping their cases. In 1875, Elkins was reelected delegate. Vote fixing was alleged, and the ring became lethal. Catron used two ring-eyed Maxwell Land Grant Company board members to hire thugs to murder the Colfax County War's anti-ring leader, Reverend Franklin Tolby. Catron then tried to hang Tolby's successor, Reverend O.P. McMains, by a malicious prosecution murder case. That 1875, Governor Giddings died in office. President Grant replaced him with Utah Territory's Republican Governor Samuel Beach Axtell. Catron's agent, his cattle dealer John Riley, then bribed Axtell with $1,800. That was half of Axtell's salary. In 1876, Axtell earned his money. He shielded Tolby's murderers from prosecution by illegally removing Colfax County's courts, and he tried to murder 4 other anti-ring men with troops in Cimarron. In 1876 was also the Grand County Rebellion. Secession to Arizona Territory was tried unsuccessfully to escape the ring, called a selfish oligarchy. In 1877, the Colfax County War peaked. Firebrand Mary Tibbles McPherson, on May 1st, spelled out the ring's organized crime to President Hayes. Unaware, that he shielded the ring. She wrote, "The United States District Attorney Thomas B. Catron, Associate Justice Warren Bristol, Henry L. Waldo, Chief Justice, Samuel B. Axtell, Governor, have conspired together. For several years, these parties have been in collusion in a general plan having for its aim the centralizing of power and the reduction of large and valuable private grants of land within the territory to their personal use and benefit. To accomplish these purposes, this ring appears to have paused at nothing, however difficult or questionable." She accused them of Tolby's murder. Catron responded that she was a crazy person and that outlaws had taken over in Colfax County. Lincoln County became Catron's trouble spot, too. Catron was making mercantile and ranching monopolies there. That started at his 1866 arrival when he got cattle as collateral on loans. He sold the beef to forts. By 1868, receipts show him allied with Lincoln County's Fort Stanton sutler store partner, Lawrence Murphy. Murphy, with partner Emil Fritz, held beef contracts for the fort and the Mescalero Indian Reservation. Catron was a secret partner in their later Lincoln store, nicknamed the House. Murphy, Fritz, and later partners James Dolan and John Riley were Catron's Lincoln County sub-bosses. In 1875, when rancher Robert Casey beat Murphy in a local election, he was murdered that day by a hitman. Catron tolerated no competition. These sub-bosses ran Catron's Pecos River cow camp. He also had his Carrizozo Land and Cattle Company ranch from 1878 to 1882, run by his brother-in-law Edgar Walsh. Dying Murphy left it to him to settle his debt. Its stock came from Seven Rivers rancher henchmen who rustled from Cattle King John Chisholm's giant herd along the Pecos River. In 1877, a rival appeared. Newcomer British John Tunstall made his own general store, bank, and cattle ranches. So Catron did his usual malicious prosecutions. He made a fake embezzlement case against anti-ring Lincoln attorney Alexander McSween about proceeds of a life insurance policy of house partner Emil Fritz. Through Ringites, District Attorney William Reinerson and Judge Warren Bristol, Catron lied that Tunstall was McSween's partner. That made Tunstall responsible for the money, too. That enabled attaching both men's property using local Ringite Sheriff William Brady. When neither man yielded, Catron had Tunstall murdered on February 18, 1878. It replicated his 1875 Colfax County murder of anti-ring leader Franklin Tolby. As with Tolby, Catron shielded the murderers. Governor Axtell was used to illegally outlaw arresting deputies like Billy Bonney and to empower only Sheriff Brady. Brady's job was to kill McSween next. Unexpectedly, Tunstall's past employees fought back as the regulators. That began the Lincoln County War. They killed Brady and his deputy George Hinman to save McSween's life. Later killed resisting arrest was a Tunstall posse murderer named Andrew Buckshot Roberts. McSween was then exonerated of embezzling by the grand jury. Responding lethally to opposition, Catron risked exposing himself and destroying his ring. On April 28th, Catron used his Seven Rivers rustlers to try McSween's murder. They succeeded in killing regulator head Frank McNabb. On June 21st, Catron used his U.S. attorney power to try to hang the regulators by his federal indictment for their Roberts killing. On July 3rd, Catron used Ringite Sheriff George Pepin and John Kinney's outlaw gang to massacre San Patricio's anti-ring Hispanic backers of the regulators. On July 14th, McSween, regulators, and Hispanic backers took a stand in Lincoln. It became the six-day Lincoln County War battle. On July 19th, Catron used Fort Stanton troops under ring-beholden commander N.A.M. Dudley to aid losing Pepin and his Seven Rivers and John Kinney outlaw posse. The troops enabled arson of McSween's house and murder of McSween and his defenders, Harvey Morris, Vicente Romero, Francisco Zamora, and near killing of Eugenio Salazar. Then Catron used his outlaw myth to cover up the freedom-fighting opponents as desperados. By October of 1878, Catron faced a reckoning. Presidential investigator Frank Warner Angel wrote a report incriminating him for Tunstall's murder and Lincoln County's turmoil. In Washington, co-boss Elkins negotiated keeping the report secret in exchange for Catron's resigning as U.S. Attorney. By July 20th, 1888, Catron further hid his 1870s criminality by a record-destroying fire in his law office. In 1893, he had Elkins destroy the report. On October 1st, 1878, ring-biased President Hayes, covering up Catron's Lincoln County war crimes by scapegoating, replaced Governor Axtell with Lew Wallace. On November 14th, Wallace wrote to a Civil War friend, Absalom Markland, "I came here and found a ring with a hand on the throat of the territory. I refused to join them, and now they are proposing to fight me." Wallace responded self-protectively by not confronting the ring and by issuing an amnesty proclamation for all non-indicted Lincoln County War participants. In late 1878, Alexander McSween's widow, Susan, hired attorney Houston Chapman to prosecute Commander Dudley for the murder of her husband and arson of her home. In 1879, Catron got defamatory affidavits about her chastity to ruin her credibility. And he murdered again. He used local sub-boss James Dolan and outlaw thugs to murder Chapman. When Susan got a new attorney, Ira Leonard, Dolan was used to try to murder him too. Catron then rigged Dudley's military court of inquiry for his acquittal with biased judges and with defense by his past law firm member, Henry Waldo. Catron also represented in court all his indicted Lincoln County war murderers and arsonists. Colluding with ring-eyed Judge Warren Bristol, he got them pardoned by misstating Wallace's amnesty proclamation barring those indicted. And Catron gifted henchmen with murdered Tunstall's belongings. James Dolan got the store. Dolan, District Attorney William Reinerson, and John Riley got his Felis River Ranch. Catron was likely a silent partner. Chief Deputy of Tunstall's murder posse, Jacob Basil Billy Matthews, got Tunstall's Penasco River Ranch. That 1879, the Lincoln County freedom fight lived on with gadfly zealot Billy Bonney. He made a pardon bargain with Governor Wallace for annulling his wartime indictments for Brady, Hinman, and Roberts in exchange for testifying against Chapman's Ringite murderers. On his own, Billy also testified against Dudley in the court of inquiry. By 1880, Billy was in Catron's sights. Billy had been in Catron's 1878 federal indictment against the regulators. He then stood out by testifying against Ringites like Chapman's murderers and Commander Dudley. So Billy's pardon request to Lew Wallace was blocked by Ring pressure, and through Catron or Elkins, a Secret Service special operative named Azariah Wild was assigned to the territory in mid-September. Catron used his brother-in-law Edgar Walsh and James Dolan to trick Wild that Billy led a rustling and counterfeiting gang. Wild empowered Sheriff-elect Pat Garrett as a deputy U.S. Marshal to capture or kill him. While trying, Garrett killed Billy's companions Tom O'Folliard and Charlie Bowdry. Garrett captured Billy on December 22nd for a hanging trial in Mesilla. But Billy's April 28, 1881 jailbreak forced Garrett to do the killing himself with a Fort Sumner ambush on July 14, 1881. Ringite Governor Lionel Sheldon, who replaced Lew Wallace, covered up the anti-Ring rebellions. He wrote, "The desperado and thieving element has substantially disappeared." Close quote. Billy became the Ring's outlaw myth symbol as their creation, Billy the Kid. Billy was the last of the anti-Ring freedom fighters. So Catron's malicious prosecutions, obsessive vendettas, attempted murders, and murders continued more brazenly. Catron had continued cattle ranching. In 1882, he made the Boston and New Mexico Cattle Company. He partnered with Surveyor General Henry M. Atkinson, whom he used to inflate acreage of his purchased land grants. By 1883, Catron killed again. His two victims replicated the Tunstall murder for desired ranch land. Since 1882, Catron was attorney for the American Valley Company Ranch. It controlled 3 million acres of grazing land. But Alexis Grossetti and Robert Elzinger said the land was theirs. So on May 6, 1883, they were murdered by employees of the company. Two so-called employees were professional gunmen hired days earlier. Another was company shareholder John P. Casey's brother. Catron paid one of the hitmen by a so-called cattle purchase. Catron paid John Casey by a so-called loan of $6,000. That's over $154,000 today. Casey then sold his shares to Catron's Boston and New Mexico Cattle Company partner, Henry Atkinson. In 1885, Catron paid Atkinson to partner in the American Valley Company. The next year, Atkinson died, leaving Catron as owner. Biographer Victor Westphal admitted that people believed Catron murdered Grossetti and Elzinger, but no one was ever prosecuted. In 1885, Catron used his Tularosa land and cattle company to reward with partnerships his Lincoln County war murderers, John Riley and William Reinerson. It controlled water rights along the Tularosa River and from the Mescalero Indian Reservation to 10 miles west of the town of Tularosa. In 1880, Catron had eliminated its competition by malicious prosecution of rancher Pat Coughlin in the Tularosa Valley. He accused him to the Secret Service of being in his fabricated Billy the Kid gang. Catron's criminality colored his political career. To accusations of vote fixing, he was elected to the territorial legislature's House in 1868 and Council from the 1880s to 1909. As one of numerous examples, on July 23, 1890, Catron got a letter from a Francisco Gonzalez y Borrego. Borrego's name, in 2 years, would become famous as Catron's hired assassin. As to vote buying, Borrego wrote, "I have the honor to report to you that I have 2 men, that they have agreed to come to the Republican Party, but you know that they always want some money. They want $10 each. I will tell you that each one of them is worth 2 votes." Close quote. Note that $10 is about $286 today. In 1891, Catron tried another malicious prosecution for personal gain. On February 5th, shots were fired into a legislative meeting. Catron said it was an assassination attempt on him. He accused leaders of the Hispanic anti-ring, anti-land grab, Las Gorras Blancas, or Whitecaps, but he failed to get them prosecuted, and it was rumored that he had been trying to assassinate rival legislators. In 1892, Catron murdered again. The victim was Santa Fe Sheriff Francisco Chavez. A Democrat, he was Catron's political opponent and a rumored Whitecap sympathizer. Catron's lackeys did the killing. They were his vote fixer, Francisco Gonzalez y Borrego, his brother Antonio Gonzalez y Borrego, Laurencio Alarid, Patricio Valencia, and Hipólito Vigil. Vigil named Catron as the instigator, but was killed during capture. Furthermore, victim Chavez had told people that he feared assassination. And as in Tolby's and Tunstall's assassinations, the murderers were shielded. Ringite Santa Fe County Sheriff Charles M. Conklin refused to arrest them. Conklin was also rumored as Catron's accomplice in murdering Chavez. It took until 1895 for arrests. It became the sensational Borrego case. Catron represented the murderers with his law partner, Charles A. Spice, as co-counsel. Biographer Westfall, blaming Democrats, wrote that the prosecutors tried harder to implicate Catron as the killer than to convict the defendants. The murder occurred on the night of May 29, 1892. Catron was running for delegate to Congress. Chavez voiced opposition. One of the prosecutors in the Borrego trial, Napoleon Bonaparte Laughlin, later wrote about the killing in an 1895 Supreme Court opinion. He stated, "At the time of Chavez's assassination, he was the acknowledged leader of his party, and the testimony given tended strongly to show that the primary motive for his assassination was an inordinate desire to remove him from the road of political preferment." Biographer Westfall used Catron's plausible deniability alibi by claiming Catron wasn't in town for the murder. But Catron knew the killers. He, Spice, and the killers belonged to a violent Republican organization called the Knights of Liberty, and Francisco Gonzalez y Borrego had murdered twice before. Catron had successfully defended him by self-defense. In fact, the Borrego case proved Catron's crime family loyalty to Ringites doing his dirty work. Catron's major accuser was his past law partner, Democrat William Thornton, now governor. He owned the Santa Fe Weekly New Mexican. He knew Catron's criminality. In 1893, he had headlined an article, "Ex-Sheriff Chavez Assassinated Because of His Political Influence." It was Thornton who removed ring-eyed Sheriff Conklin for embezzling public funds. It was Thornton who replaced him with William P. Cunningham, a Democrat. On January 10, 1895, 591 days after Francisco Chavez's murder, Sheriff Cunningham arrested his killers. Thornton reported in his paper that in the January 14th pretrial hearings, Juan Gallegos testified that Hipólito Vigil, the one killed during arrest, told him that Catron offered him $700 to kill Francisco Chavez plus legal defense by Catron himself. Note that in 1875, in the Colfax County War, gunslinger Clay Allison also claimed that Catron offered him $700 to kill anti-ring opponent Franklin Tolby. Other eyewitnesses incriminated the 4 Borrego case defendants. The 1895 trial's prosecutor was District Attorney Jacob H. Christ. During the trial, Catron and Spice bribed, intimidated, slandered, and kidnapped prosecution witnesses. Nevertheless, on May 29th, the defendants were sentenced to hang. Catron responded with his usual defamatory affidavits, here from jurors attacking prosecutor Christ, but the judge rejected them. In that July's plea bargaining, Laurencio Alarid and Patricio Valencia confessed that they and the Borrego brothers had murdered Chavez. But Catron remained untouched. That 1895, Elkins became West Virginia's senator. He tried to help Catron stop the defendants' hangings. But Catron got caught for something. On August 20th, prosecutor Jacob H. Christ filed a complaint with the Territorial Supreme Court against Catron and Spice for witness tampering. The court appointed 5 attorneys to prepare charges. On August 31st, disbarment charges were filed. The tampered prosecution witnesses' transcripts showed horrifying pressures to make them recant testimony against the Borrego case defendants. Catron's response was his usual outlawing. He called these prosecution witnesses, quote, penitentiary convicts and disreputable characters unworthy of credit or belief. Behind the scenes, sociopath Catron defamed accuser Jacob Christ and pressured the Supreme Court judges. He had Judge Humphrey B. Hamilton contacted by his friend, Socorro chieftain publisher W.S. Williams. To influence Judge Gideon Bance, Catron used Elkins, whose wife was Bance's cousin. There was an obstacle. Supreme Court Chief Justice Thomas Smith was honest, and gone were the 1867 days when ring-eyed William Reinerson simply murdered anti-ring Chief Justice John P. Slough. So Catron began a press campaign to ruin Smith professionally and personally. He used Albuquerque Daily Citizen editor Thomas Hughes, whom he previously bribed for political backing. On October 9th, Hughes published an anonymous letter by Catron. Catron pretended to be a man protecting Catron by exposing bad Judge Smith. It was titled, "Is It Honesty or Partisanship?" It made up that bad Smith colluded with one of the attorneys drawing up the charges to cripple good Catron's effort to help New Mexico's people. Then, Catron added a diabolical twist. Anonymous claimed that the Bar Association vouched for Catron so bad Smith was insulting the Bar Association by accusing Catron. The next day, October 10th, Catron responded as himself to the anonymous letter. Complicit editor Hughes printed it with his own so-called response, which Catron wrote also. Catron's letter said his enemies were trying to hurt his disbarment case by saying he was anonymous. Hughes's response denied Catron as being anonymous. This was perjury. The same October 10th, Catron sent Hughes a real letter. Catron told him that if he was charged with perjury, he should hide Catron's role, and he told him to destroy the letter. Catron's biographer, Victor Westphal, spun his criminality as loyalty. Hughes was fined and jailed. Westphal wrote, Tom Catron did not forget his promise to make up the difference for Thomas Hughes' forbearance in accepting quietly the jail sentence on behalf of Catron. Catron responded with financial aid, close quote. On July 11, 1896, Catron wrote Hughes a payoff check for $350 from his First National Bank of Santa Fe. That's over $9,000 today. Catron continued to attack Judge Thomas Smith. He got his usual fake affidavits to claim Smith had been bribed to reverse another judge's decision. Then he wrote another anonymous letter for his friend W.S. Williams's Socorro chieftain. It said Smith's uncles were an embezzler and a murderer, and he was a drunkard and a homosexual. It all worked. That October 25th, the corrupted Supreme Court vindicated Catron and Spice. Traumatized Chief Justice Smith was absent, claiming illness. The majority opinion was by bribed Judge Humphrey H. Hamilton. He stated that, quote, the low moral character and poor reputation for veracity of the prosecution witnesses rendered their testimony about tampering beyond belief. He ignored the Albuquerque Daily Citizen scandal. But Judge Napoleon Bonaparte Laughlin dissented. He wrote that those witnesses were so credible that they got the Borrego case murderers a hanging sentence. He added that Catron's Albuquerque Daily Citizen attack on Chief Justice Smith itself merited disbarment. So Catron got away with murdering Francisco Chavez and witness tampering. And he was immediately elected president of the Bar Association. He and his ring were untouchable. But Catron's vindictiveness was unsatiated. He tried to destroy Prosecutor Jacob Christ, dissenting Judge Napoleon Bonaparte Laughlin, and Governor William Thornton. Catron pursued Prosecutor Christ with private detectives. They found an old Dormant, Colorado indictment for larceny of household furniture, but there were no witnesses. Learning Christ was traveling to Arizona, Catron tried to have him arrested there. Then he backed off, realizing he risked disbarment again, this time for obvious malicious prosecution. As to Judge Laughlin, on July 18, 1896, Catron used his powerful ring-eyed ally, William J. Mills, in Washington, later the last territorial governor, to damage his career. As to Governor Thornton, on September 5, 1896, Catron wrote another anonymous letter to editor Hughes for his Albuquerque Daily Citizen. He called Thornton Dissolute Poker Bill and made up that he caused the Borrego case convictions by tampering the court record. Thornton, as rough as Catron, was unfazed. He printed the letter in his paper. He called Catron a coward, hiding behind anonymity. and he accused him of the Albuquerque Daily Citizen's anonymous defamation of Chief Justice Thomas Smith. Catron decompensated into a savage frenzy of letters. On September 16th, he accused Thornton of trying to make him commit, quote, some act of violence which might give your adherents an opportunity to injure me physically. Don't miss this window into Catron's psychopathic mind. He blames his potential victim for forcing him to kill, and he projects his murderous urge onto Thornton, thinking that Thornton threatened him. Thornton, calling him venomous, published it. Then, with deranged paranoia, Catron tried unsuccessfully to get President Grover Cleveland to fire Thornton as governor for, quote, inciting bloodshed, though the bloody urge was his own. With crime boss loyalty, he then suggested as replacement one of Billy Bonney's killing team, John William Poe. Catron also wrote to Elkins to help in removing Thornton. It failed. As slight justice, exposed Catron lost his 1896 run for delegate to Congress, even with his usual vote fixing. So he tried to get reappointed as U.S. Attorney despite his 1878 forced resignation to hide his murdering John Tunstall. Elkins tried to pull Washington's strings, but Catron was defeated, in part, by his victim, past Governor Lew Wallace, well aware of his evil. On April 2nd, 1897, the Borrego case murderers were hanged. That made Francisco Chavez just the second ring victim whose murderers, excluding Catron, got punished. And he was Catron's last known corpse in his 25-year killing spree. The others were John Potts Slough, Franklin Tolby, Robert Casey, whose hitman was hanged, Maxwell Land Grant settlers, John Tunstall, Frank McNabb, San Patricio massacre victims, Alexander McSween, Harvey Morris, Vicente Romero, Francisco Zamora, Houston Chapman, Tom O'Folliard, Charlie Bowdry, Billy Bonney, Alexis Grossetetti, and Robert Elzinger. Accidental survivors were Colfax County's William Morley, Frank Springer, Henry Porter, and Clay Allison, and Lincoln County's Juan Patron, Eugenio Salazar, and Ira Leonard. But that doesn't mean that Catron stopped trying. Next on Catron's hit list was a ranching competitor in the Tularosa Valley named Oliver Lee. Catron did his usual malicious prosecution, using Billy Bonney's betraying court-appointed attorney, Albert Jennings Fountain, as co-counsel. Catron attacked Oliver Lee and his ranch hand, William McNew, for rustling and defacing brands. Convicting Lee would also sully Catron's political rival, Democrat Albert B. Fall, as Lee's friend and attorney. Lee had come from Texas to the Tularosa Valley in 1884, making his Sacramento Cattle Company. He had a power base and gunman ranch hands. One was James Gilliland. On January 30th, 1896, Fountain and Catron got Lee and McNew indicted in Lincoln's courthouse. But Fountain got a threatening note, later found in his abandoned buggy on the road home. He and his young son Henry were believed murdered. Their bodies were never found. Catron, of course, accused Oliver Lee. Added was ranch hand James Gilliland. Hanging was Catron's favored killing, since it looked legal, and Catron knew the right man for the job. Pat Garrett had successfully led the Secret Service hunt for the fictitious Billy the Kid gang. Then, after Billy's jailbreak, he had efficiently killed him. Garrett, on hard times because of alcoholism, abrasive personality, and business failures, was brought from Uvalde, Texas. He was to be made Doña Ana County Sheriff. If he got Lee and Gilliland convicted, he'd get $8,000. That's about $248,000 today. Garrett had ambushed Billy Bonney near midnight and had called it self-defense. So on the night of July 12, 1898, at Oliver Lee's property at Wildey Well, Garrett ambushed presumably sleeping Oliver Lee and James Gilliland on an adobe house's flat rooftop. They were awake. They shot dead his possemen. Garrett retreated. Lee and Gilliland later surrendered. On May 21, 1899, ring-eyed attorney Sidney Barnes, one of Billy Bonney's Messiah trial prosecutors, reported to Catron about coercing local rustlers to be witnesses for the prosecution. In their 1901 trial, Lee and Gilliland were declared innocent. Garrett's dead posseman was considered a self-defense killing. Oliver Lee subsequently succeeded in business and was twice elected to the legislature. He escaped Catron's lethal clutches. Next attacked by Catron was his political enemy Miguel Otero, seeking governorship after William Thornton. Murder was out of the question. On May 2, 1897, Catron sent to President William McKinley his henchmen Henry Waldo and John Riley to block the appointment. Of Catron, Otero had written, "It was inevitable that we should conflict. He was dictatorial and absolutely ruthless in his methods." Otero was confirmed that June 2nd. To block Otero's reappointment, Catron filed charges against him to President McKinley and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt. There was usual defamatory affidavits and sexual scandal-mongering. Elkins helped, but Otero was reappointed. Catron then met personally with President Roosevelt. He accused Otero of stealing military equipment and having a ring. There was no third term, but Otero said he'd refused one. Catron then got Herbert J. Hagerman appointed governor. For payback, he wanted to be appointed Attorney General, apparently to maliciously prosecute Miguel Otero. He was not appointed. Next, Catron and Elkins got ring friend George Curry appointed governor for 2 terms, followed by ring friend William J. Mills. So Catron prevailed. Catron's goal was state senatorship. On November 15, 1911, he requested legislators' backing. The press claimed he bribed them. Biographer Westphal quoted his son, Charles C. Catron, inadvertently implying bribery. On June 3, 1921, after Catron's death, Charles wrote, "My father probably spent over $1 million in following up his hobby of politics." Close quote. If the spending was that 1911, it was today's $27 million. If one starts with Catron's bribes of legislators in the 1872 legislature revolt, it's much more with today's inflation. Elkins died January 4, 1911, missing the statehood resolution signed by President William Howard Taft that August 21st. New Mexico became the 47th state on January 6, 1912. On April 2nd, Catron was sworn in as senator along with Albert Fall. Catron held office till 1917. On May 15, 1921, at 80, Catron died in bed. It was 79 days after still existing Catron County was carved out in New Mexico on February 25th to honor this monster. His eulogy was written by a George W. Pritchard. He gushed, "Hypocrisy was never laid at his door. He did not cherish animosity toward an enemy. Those who had the hardest things to say of him knew the least about him." For the Santa Fe New Mexican, and E. Dana Johnson added, "He was frankly a practical politician. The appellation boss complimented instead of offending him." Omitted were Thomas Benton Catron's real achievements. He was a serial murderer who never got caught. He created the criminal syndicate of the Santa Fe Ring, an American fiefdom, insulated from exposure or prosecution, so perfect that it exists to the present. And T.B. Catron invented the outlaw myth of Billy the Kid to cover up his own outlawry. It would be fitting if his most famous victim, Billy Bonney, hero of New Mexico's grandest freedom fight against him, finally set the record straight. That's the purpose of my talks.